We are joined by John Kiriakou, former CIA officer and Chief of Counter-Terrorism Operations in Pakistan. He was the first CIA official to confirm the agency's use of torture. So John, what was your role at the CIA, and what were the events that led up to you blowing the whistle on waterboarding and then the consequences for that?
Well, really the whole story started in Pakistan. I arrived in Pakistan as the Chief of CIA Counterterrorism Operations in January of 2002. And in March of 2002, we got word that Abu Zubaydah was somewhere in the country. Abu Zubaydah, we believed at the time, was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. So we tracked him, we hunted him for several weeks. We finally found him and a lot of Al-Qaeda fighters, many dozens. I'm not allowed to say the real number or the actual number. We captured him and sent him to a secret prison. I'm going to make a very long story short and tell you that I went back to CIA headquarters in the summer of 2002. As soon as I arrived, a senior officer in the CIA's Counterterrorism Center asked me if I wanted to be, his words, certified in the use of enhanced interrogation techniques. I had never heard the term before, so I asked him what that meant. And he delineated for me 10 different techniques that we were going to begin using against prisoners. I said, that sounds like a torture program to me, but let me think about it. So I went upstairs to the 7th floor, which is the executive floor of the CIA, and I went to see a very, very senior officer for whom I had worked in the Middle East about a decade earlier. And I said, hey, I need to ask some advice. They just asked me downstairs if I want to be certified in these enhanced interrogation techniques. What do you think of this? And he said, first, let's call it what it is. It's a torture program. They can use any euphemism they want, but this is a torture program. Second, torture is a slippery slope. And you know how some of these guys are. Somebody's going to go overboard, and they're going to kill a prisoner in custody. And then there's going to be a congressional investigation, and then there's going to be a Justice Department investigation, and somebody's going to go to prison. Do you want to go to prison? I said, no, I don't want to go to prison. Ironically, I'm the only one who went to prison. But I said, no, I don't want to go to prison. I went back downstairs, and I said, this is a torture program. I don't want any part of it. And as it turned out, of the 14 people they asked, I was the only one who declined. So I went about my business. On August 1st, 2002, the CIA began torturing Abu Zubaydah at this secret location. Other prisoners were also subsequently tortured, but I kept my mouth shut. Now, I left the CIA 2 years later, in 2004, and I went into the private sector. In December 2007, right, 5.5 years after I was asked if I wanted to be trained in these techniques, 5.5 years later, I get a call from Brian Ross at ABC News. And he said that he had a source who said that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. I said that was absolutely untrue. I had never touched Abu Zubaydah or any other prisoner. I said, your source is either misinformed or he's a liar. And well, Brian Ross says, you're welcome to come on the show and defend yourself, which I didn't know was a reporter's trick. So I said I'd think about it. In the meantime, President Bush gives a press conference in which he looks directly into the camera and says, we do not torture. But I knew that was a lie. In fact, my wife, who was also a senior CIA officer at the time, we were watching that press conference together, and I turned to her and I said, can you believe this? And she said, bald-faced liar. And then a few days later, he said in response to a reporter's question, well, if there is torture, it's the result of a rogue CIA officer. And I said to my wife, Brian Ross has sources at the White House, and they're going to try to pin this on me. So I called Brian Ross, and I said, I'll do your interview. And I decided, in the lead up to that interview, that no matter what he asked me, I was going to tell the truth. And so I gave that interview in December 2007. Within 24 hours, the CIA filed with the FBI something called a crimes report, indicating that they believed I had committed a crime. The FBI investigated me from December of 2007 to December of 2008. And then in December 2008, they dropped the case, they closed it, and they determined that I had not committed a crime. What I didn't know was 4 weeks later, when President Obama was inaugurated, the CIA asked Eric Holder to secretly reopen the case against me, which they did. I didn't know that I was under investigation for the next 4 years. And then in January 2012, I was charged with 5 felonies, including 3 counts of espionage.
What responsibility do you think the media plays or should play, and how do they perform in getting out stories from the White House from sources within the government, and then having an adversarial role, or recently, anonymously sourced CIA stories that Russians hacked the 2016 presidential election?
Yeah.
I mean, how did they perform with you, and how do you see their responsibility now?
This is such a tough and complicated issue because there are so many different and competing angles involved in it. First, let me talk about whistleblowing, because there's a big difference between whistleblowing and leaking. There's actually a legal definition of whistleblowing. It's bringing to light any evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, illegality, or threats to the public health or public safety. Leaking is just leaking classified or proprietary information. And people do that for a lot of different reasons. They do it in order to impact an ongoing debate. They do it to make themselves look good. They do it to kill a program or to damage an adversary. They do it because they love the excitement of being the guy providing the information. But there's no benefit to the public health, the public safety. There's no targeting of waste, fraud, abuse, or illegality. It's different. So, while it may be interesting that, for example, in a conversation between President Trump and the Prime Minister of Australia, that Trump was rude to him and Trump hung up on him, the person who leaked that story within 5 or 10 minutes of the phone call is not reporting on waste, fraud, abuse, or illegality. It's fun, it's interesting, but it's not whistleblowing. It's a leak. And I can understand any president having great frustrations with leaks. I mean, nobody was as Nixonian, besides Nixon, as Barack Obama was. But it's my understanding that Trump is pretty upset about leaks, too.
Now, Obama is, he's still held in high regard. People are loving the, images of him going on vacation after he was president. People seem to love that. Seeing former President George Bush as well. He's been on Jimmy Kimmel Live.
Oh, yeah.
On DeGeneres show.
Yeah, showing his paintings.
His image has seemed to be rehabilitated, and among the left, among liberals who say Bill Maher says, he was better than we thought, sort of. These were the good old days. Right. Why is there sticking to Obama, he said he'd have the most transparent administration ever. Couldn't Democrats say, well, at least he was smarter than Bush and smarter than McCain and Romney and better, we could trust him?
Listen, I'm a third-generation Democrat, and I am a die-hard progressive. I believed in the whole hope and change thing. It was all a lie. Nobody was more an enemy of transparency than Barack Obama was. We have a law in this country called the Espionage Act. The Espionage Act was written in 1917 to combat German saboteurs. It was never updated. It doesn't even mention the words classified information because the classification system wasn't even invented until the 1950s. And it's so broadly written that in order to commit espionage, a person has to only provide national defense information to any person not entitled to receive it. That's what the law says. Well, that can be anything or anybody, right? And so Barack Obama used it as a political weapon. Now, between 1917 and 2009, 3 Americans were charged with espionage for providing information to the press. Just during the Obama administration, he and Eric Holder prosecuted 8 people for providing information to the press, all charged with espionage. Espionage is a grave crime, one of the gravest crimes with which an American can be charged. And in many cases, it carries with it the death penalty. So if you want to clamp down on leaks, that's one thing. But to use the Espionage Act to clamp down on people whose message you don't like? Tom Drake is a great example. Tom Drake was a very senior NSA officer, very senior, and probably our country's leading thinker on issues of internet privacy. Tom Drake reported exactly the way he was supposed to, up his chain of command, an instance of waste, fraud, and abuse, right? It was a program called Thin Thread. And he realized that Thin Thread, while a complete waste of the taxpayers' money, was being doubled back against Americans. And instead of spying on foreign nationals and on terrorists, NSA was spying on American citizens. So he went to his supervisor and was told to mind his own business. He then went to the inspector general and was told the same thing. He complained to the general counsel and was told he needs to stay out of it. He went to the Pentagon inspector general because NSA is a Defense Department agency. They destroyed the evidence that he brought with him and reported him to the FBI. And then he went to the Congressional Oversight Committee to report this waste, fraud, and abuse. Now, at every single step of the way, this is exactly what you're supposed to do. And what happened to Tom Drake? He was charged with 9 felonies, including 7 counts of espionage. All 9 of those felonies were dismissed, but not until he lost his job. He lost his clearance, he lost his family, he lost his pension. He was ruined. He's never recovered. Now he works at an Apple store in Maryland. He's never been able to recover financially, socially, professionally, and that's what the Obama Justice Department was trying to do. The issue is not, let's lock this guy up for the rest of his life. They don't care about that. But they care about making an example of you. So if somebody else sees waste, fraud, abuse, or illegality, they keep their mouth shut. They say, look what happened to John Kiriakou. Look what happened to Tom Drake. You know, those guys were facing 45 years in prison. They ran up $2 million legal bills. They lost everything. Why would we want to do that? We're going to keep our mouths shut. That's the legacy of Barack Obama.
Couldn't a case be made, because there are people who say, well, you went through the legal process, Thomas Drake went through the legal process, the law ultimately works, and now when you had your day in court, how did that play out in terms of, okay, you had your chance to present your evidence, Thomas Drake?
Oh, no, you don't have your chance to present your evidence, because although we have something called the Whistleblower Protection Act in this country, national security whistleblowers are exempt from it. So there is no whistleblower protection if you work in national security. You literally take your life into your hands. That's why, in many cases, many people will conclude that it's better just to keep their mouths shut. So national security whistleblowers don't get their day in court. And even when you go through the formal process, you still end up with felony counts. Now, I didn't go through the formal process because my formal process created the CIA's torture program. So my choices were very stark. My choices were to keep my mouth shut or go to the media. And I elected to go to the media.
What were your options as far as what evidence was admissible for your court case, and also what kind of testimony you could give in defense of yourself?
I was greatly hampered by my judge. I was charged in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is known as the Espionage Court. The reason it's called the Espionage Court is that almost every national security case is argued in the Eastern District of Virginia because no national security defendant has ever won a case there. Prosecutors are the ones who win every case 100% of the time. So when we went with our defense motions to the judge, we made 70 motions. These were 70 different classified documents that we needed to have declassified in order to defend myself. So we went to court. We blocked off 2 days for the hearings, and the judge said that she had read the motions, and she said, I'm going to save everybody a lot of time. I'm denying all 70 motions. So the whole process took about 10 minutes, not 2 days. And on the way out of the courtroom, I said to one of my attorneys, what just happened here? And he said, what just happened is we have no defense. You can't defend yourself. She won't allow you to defend yourself. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, that means we have to talk about a plea. Well, it becomes an economic decision. If the judge won't allow you to defend yourself because the information's classified, and God forbid you should say something that's vaguely classified in a court of law, even if the courtroom is closed and sealed. The CIA doesn't want any of that information out. So you can challenge it and you can appeal to the Circuit Court of Appeals. If you lose there, you can appeal to the Supreme Court. But as my attorneys advised me, we're talking about a $2 or $3 million legal bill. I already owed them $1 million. I don't have a total of $3 or $4 million to defend myself. And then the government comes in and says, all right, 30 months, you do 23. So do I roll the dice and face 45 years with a realistic expectation of 12 to 18, but a possibility of as many as 24 years? Or do I just take the 23 months and be done with it? And that's exactly why the government wins 98.2% of its cases, according to ProPublica. Because they heap on these charges, friendly judges don't allow you to defend yourself, and you're faced with this economic decision. You know, do I lose my family and risk dying in prison, or do I just take the 23 months and be done with it?
Couldn't we say that, well, at least these were dangerous terror suspects you were dealing with? Waterboarding could be necessary.
How do we know that? How do we know that? Abu Zubaydah.
9/11. We were attacked on 9/11. We were attacked.
And which of the people that we have in custody was responsible for 9/11? Let me tell you something about Abu Zubaydah. Abu Zubaydah was not the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. Abu Zubaydah never joined Al-Qaeda. He was certainly a bad guy. He ran some safe houses. He ran one of the training camps, sure. But this man's never faced his day in court. We're supposed to be a country of laws. We're supposed to be a country that respects its constitution. We're supposed to be this beacon of human rights around the world. And we're not. Not when we decide that justice is okay for some people, but for other people we're not going to allow justice. We just put them in Guantanamo to live the rest of their lives and die in a cage. That's not what the Constitution's about. We're either going to be a country of laws or we're not. And that's a political decision we have to make. And if we're not, we shouldn't bully the rest of the world to live up to our standards. That's just simply not fair. Now, if there are terrorists out there that we capture, let's do what Americans ought to do and put them on trial. Not strike them from drones without the benefit of facing their accusers in a court of law, which we also do to American citizens, I might add. Let them face their accusers in court.